The lights came back. The crowd still moved, mouths wide open, yet not a single sound reached Eminem's ears. The bass rattled the floorboards. The crowd was a tidal wave, surging, screaming, thousands of voices rolling together into one unstoppable wall of sound. Marshall gripped the mic in both hands, sweat dripping down his forearms, hoodie clinging to his skin. The arena lights strobed across a sea of faces, every one of them hungry, every one of them locked on him. This was what he lived for, the noise, the chaos, the roar that swallowed everything. He spit another verse, voice sharp, relentless, and the crowd fed it back to him in perfect sync. The chant rattled the rafters, and for a moment he felt invincible, lifted on the backs of people who knew every word he'd ever bled onto paper. Then, without warning, the lights cut out, pitch black, the stage monitors crackled, then died. The bass dropped to nothing. The roar collapsed in an instant, leaving behind a silence so thick it rang in his skull. Marshall froze, chest heaving. Sweat cooled on his skin as he waited for the backup generators to kick in, for the emergency lights to fire. He'd been through blackouts before, venues, lost power, circuits tripped. It happened. He told himself this was nothing different. A single spotlight snapped on above him, blinding. He blinked hard, raised a hand to shield his eyes. The beam cut across the arena, spilling over the crowd. They were all still there, every row filled, every hand still raised, every mouth still open, but no sound came out. Marshall's stomach dropped. Thousands of fans moved as if the show had never stopped. They jumped, they waved signs, they pumped their fists to the beat. But the beat was gone. Their mouths stretched wide, faces twisted in joy or rage. Yet the silence was absolute. It was like watching a concert on mute. He tapped the mic against his palm. No thud. He shouted, "Yo." But the word vanished before it left his lips. The speakers stayed dead, the silence pressing in, tighter, thicker, until it felt like the air itself refused to vibrate. Marshall staggered back a step, sweat stinging his eyes. This some kind of joke? He muttered, but even his own voice sounded trapped in his skull. He heard himself only inside his head, not in the room. The crowd's mouths kept moving, perfectly synced. And then he saw if their lips were forming his words. Every line of the verse he'd just spit poured out of their mouths silently. Thousands of Marshalls echoing him in mime dot. The spotlight dimmed for a fraction of a second. In the darkness, he swore he saw their faces blur, as if skin had smoothed into masks. When the light snapped back, they were human again, but their eyes burned brighter, their mouths wider, stretching too far for flesh. Marshall's chest clenched. His grip on the mic tightened until his knuckles ached. He turned toward the wings, looking for his crew. No one. The curtain hung still. No managers, no stagehands, no security. Just him and the silent crowd. He spun back to the audience, heart hammering. The silence screamed louder than any roar he'd ever heard. His throat went dry. Then, all at once, the crowd stopped moving. Tens of thousands froze, mid-shear, mid-wave, Every mouth hung open, every eye locked on him. The silence deepened, and from the front row, a boy lowered his sign. His lips didn't move like the others. He just stared at Marshall, eyes wide, unblinking. The spotlight swung down, bathing the boy in pale light, and in the silence, Marshall finally heard something. Not a voice, a whisper of air. Too close, curling against his ear. "Keep rapping." Marshall's pulse hammered so loud it felt like the only living sound left in the arena. His chest rose and fell in jagged bursts, hoodie damp with sweat. He gripped the mic tight, but it was useless now, dead plastic. No hum, no feedback, no life. The silence pressed in, suffocating, heavier than any wall of sound he'd ever faced. The crowd was frozen statues, mouths still open in permanent screams. Tens of thousands of faces stretched wide, teeth gleaming under the single spotlight. Not one blinked, not one flinched. Only the boy in the front row moved. He lowered his sign, slow, deliberate, like dropping a verdict. His eyes locked on Marshall's, unblinking, unwavering. That was when the whisper slid into his ear, hot and close, as if spoken from just behind his shoulder. "Keep rapping." Marshall's throat tightened. He turned, half expecting to see someone leaning against the amps. Some twisted prank. Nothing, just the void. He wanted to leave. He needed to leave. But when he glanced toward the wings, the curtain was just a wall of black. No crew, no security, no escape. The boy's stare dragged him back toward the mic. His lips trembled. Against every instinct he tried, the first line left his mouth raw and shaky. No sound hit the speakers, but instantly the crowd came to life, bodies jerking, mouths snapping in unison, forming his words before he even finished them. Marshall's stomach turned. They weren't listening. They were anticipating, like they already knew every word. He stopped. The crowd froze mid-motion. Silence heavier than before dropped on the arena, like the oxygen had been sucked out. Tens of thousands of wide mouths hung open, every eye burning holes into him. The boy tilted his head slowly. Unlike the rest, his lips moved. Marshall heard him clearly, even across the impossible stillness. "Don't stop." Marshall's knees wobbled. "Nah," he muttered, voice dry in his own skull. This ain't real." The crowd twitched. Every head jerked slightly toward him in unison. Jaws stretched wider, impossibly wide, like hinges snapping loose. No sound. Just a void that swallowed the air hole. His grip on the mic tightened. "This what you want?" The boy nodded once. Marshall's chest heaved. He dragged in a breath and forced the next bar out. Spitting against the silence, the effect was instant. The entire arena convulsed as one. Tens of thousands of bodies jerked in rhythm, stomping, waving, dancing to a beat that wasn't there. The floor shuddered under his feet, the walls groaned, the rafters shook. But still not a single sound. The silence thundered harder than any noise. Marshall kept spitting, faster, desperate, and the crowd kept moving, their mouths forming his words with uncanny precision. But then he realized they weren't following him. They were ahead. Their lips shaped the lines before his own left his mouth. His throat closed up. He faltered, breaking the verse. The crowd didn't. They finished it without him. Tens of thousands of silent Marshalls rapping the words that hadn't yet left his throat. Marshall's vision blurred. Stop, stop. His scream echoed only inside his own skull. The arena froze again. Every body locked mid-gesture, mouths still open. The silence thickened into a living thing, pressing against his eardrums until they ached. Then the boy climbed onto the barricade. Slowly, mechanically, he pulled himself up, his eyes never leaving Marshall's. His lips shaped three words, crisp, deliberate, carrying across the silence like a knife through fog. "You can't leave." Marshall stumbled back, his shoes skidding on the stage floor. The spotlight swiveled, snapping down on him, so bright it scorched his vision white. When the light dimmed just enough for him to see again, his heart plummeted. The boy wasn't in the front row anymore. He was standing on stage, right beside him. Marshall's breath came ragged, chest rising and falling like he'd just run a mile. His eyes locked on the boy who now stood only feet away, bathed in the merciless glare of the spotlight. He couldn't be more than 12, drowning in a hoodie 2 sizes too big, pale skin almost glowing against the dark stage. But it wasn't his size or his stare that chilled Marshall, it was his lips. They moved, not at random, not nervously, but with a rhythm Marshall knew as well as his own heartbeat. Each syllable, each curl of the mouth formed his verse, the very one he had spit minutes earlier. Except Marshall hadn't opened his mouth yet. He froze, stomach knotting. The boy's lips were one step ahead, shaping the line before Marshall even thought it. And then, like his throat was on a string, Marshall's own mouth betrayed him. The words spilled out exactly as the boy had mouthed them, one beat late. One shadow behind it was like watching himself from the outside, only to realize he was the copy, not the source. His hands shot up, clawing at his throat. No, this ain't me," he croaked. But even as he denied it, the next bar poured free, unchosen, unstoppable. The boy's expression shifted, lips curling into the faintest grin. His small face twisted into something both innocent and cruel. He moved his mouth again, shaping another line in Marshall's lungs, obeyed before he could resist. The spotlight seared hotter, and with it the arena changed. The silent crowd, frozen all this time, suddenly shifted. Slowly, mechanically, tens of thousands of heads turned in unison toward the stage. Their jaws snapped shut in perfect sync. The silence deepened, crushing, pressing against Marshall's skull like iron. Only the boy's lips moved now. He leaned closer. So close, Marshall could see the faint cracks in his lips. The way his breath didn't cloud in the cold spotlight like it should. His whisper didn't make sound, but Marshall heard it inside his skull as clearly as if it had been his own thought. "You're the delay. I'm the source." Marshall stumbled back until his sneakers skidded against the stage edge. His whole body shook. "No, you're not me. You can't be me." The boy's grin stretched wider, unnatural, tearing across his face until it was too big for him. His hands never moved, but the mic in Marshall's grip jerked loose. It floated upward, trembling in the stale air, until it pressed against the boy's lips. The arena erupted. The dead speakers roared to life, blasting Marshall's voice, but not the shredded, raw sound of his throat. This was flawless. Sharper, crueler, perfect cadence, perfect pitch. The verse slammed into the rafters, shook the seats, rattled the bones of the crowd, and the audience responded. Tens of thousands of bodies convulsed violently, moving in rhythm, stomping and waving, every chest heaving with silent screams. They weren't waiting on Marshall anymore. They were following the boy, the source. Marshall dropped to his knees, clutching his ears, but it didn't stop. The words still clawed their way up his throat. One beat behind the boys. He was no longer rapping, he was echoing, a shadow of himself. His stomach churned. His head spun. He looked out at the endless sea of fans and saw the truth. They weren't individuals anymore. They were one body, one mouth, one mind, each of them echoing his own words. But half a breath late, the boy tilted his head, eyes glowing faint in the light. He pulled the mic back, just enough to whisper, lips parting slow, deliberate. Marshall knew what he was going to say before he even formed the words, and when they came, they cut colder than any scream. "You're not the voice anymore." Marshall's legs trembled beneath him, but he forced himself to stay standing. Sweat poured down his face, dripping into his eyes, stinging, blurring the stage lights into smeared halos. The mic hung loose in his hand, dead weight, while the boy stood in the center of the spotlight like he owned it, like he was it from the arena speakers. Marshall's voice exploded clear, flawless, perfect. Every syllable boomed like a verdict, cutting through the silence that had swallowed the world. But he knew, deep in his bones, that sound wasn't his anymore. It hadn't come from his chest. It hadn't passed his lips. It came from the boy. Marshall tried to speak, but his throat scraped dry. His words came out shredded, raw, broken. "Stop this. They came here for me." The boy tilted his head. His small face didn't blink, didn't soften. His lips moved before Marshall's could, and the words rolled from the speakers instantly. A weapon disguised as a verse. "They came here for the voice, not the man." The crowd responded. Tens of thousands moved as one, jerking violently, then raising their arms high in unison, palms out, reaching toward the boy like supplicants before an altar. Their mouths were sealed shut, their lips pressed together unnaturally tight, but their chests heaved in rhythm. Marshall's stomach clenched. Their breaths weren't random. They were a beat, a rhythm. The arena itself throbbed with it, every inhale and exhale blending into a single pulse. He pressed a hand against his chest and froze. His own heart was sinking to theirs. Every thud lined up perfectly with the crowd's silent rhythm. He tried to will it off beat, to force his pulse back into chaos, but his body betrayed him. With every second, the pull grew stronger, a tidal wave dragging him under. The boy smiled faintly, lips pale in the glow, eyes glinting with something older than his face should allow. His hoodie seemed to stretch and flicker, the fabric forming shadow shapes that didn't belong to a child at all. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raised the floating mic to his lips. The speakers trembled. One voice, one crowd, one source. The arena erupted not with sound, but with movement so violent it shook the building to its foundation. Tens of thousands of bodies convulsed, hands raised higher, eyes blazing white. The silence was unbearable, crushing, louder than any noise could ever be. Marshall dropped to his knees, the mic slipping from his grip and clattering uselessly to the floor. No sound came from it. It was just metal now. The boy's grin stretched unnaturally wide, splitting his face almost to his ears. He leaned into the glowing mic, whispering, but the whisper boomed through the speakers, vast and absolute, shaking the rafters, rattling Marshall's bones. "You were the echo. Now you're nothing at all." The spotlight above flared to white-hot intensity, blinding, erasing everything in sight. Marshall threw his hands over his eyes, and when the light finally dimmed, his stomach dropped. The boy was gone. The crowd was gone. He stood alone on the stage. The seats stretched empty into the shadows, silent and cold, like no one had ever been there. But the speakers still boomed with his voice, verse after verse, line after line, flowing with a perfection he couldn't match anymore. It was endless, unstoppable, alive. Marshall staggered forward, shaking his head, tears cutting tracks through the sweat on his cheeks. "That's not me," he whispered hoarsely. "That's not me." But the voice didn't stop. It laughed, His own laugh, only sharper, crueler, stronger, and in that hollow, cavernous arena, Marshall realized the truth. The voice didn't need him anymore. Marshall stumbled off stage, legs heavy as stone, hoodie plastered to his skin. The arena's exit door slammed shut behind him with a metallic boom, the sound echoing in his skull. He dragged himself down a long corridor, past posters of past tours and shows that now looked like faded ghosts. His chest heaved, throat raw, but at least he was away from the spotlight, away from him. He shoved open the service door and staggered into the night air. Detroit's winter wind hit him sharp, cold enough to sting his blistered palms. For the first time all night, he thought he might finally be safe. Then he froze. The street outside wasn't empty. Crowds lined the sidewalks. Stretching down the block, packed shoulder to shoulder under the glow of streetlights. Hundreds and no thousands of faces stared at him. Men, women, children. Some in coats, some in work uniforms, some in pajamas, as if they'd just walked out of their homes. All of them stood still, all of them silent, and all of them moved their lips. Marshall's heart nearly stopped. He knew the shapes of those words, his own lyrics, his own verses, line after line, spilling silently from their mouths in perfect sync. Just like the crowd inside the arena, he stumbled backward, hitting the doorframe. No, this ain't real, he rasped, his voice barely more than air dot. The silence pressed in tighter. Streetlights flickered, buzzing faintly, then died one by one, plunging the city block into shadow. Still, the crowd's mouths moved, wider and wider, their jaws stretching unnaturally far until the silence felt like it was screaming. Marshall's eyes darted. Across the street, a man in a diner uniform mouthed his verse. At the corner, a woman in a business suit did the same. Even a child clutching a teddy bear moved her lips. Eyes glowing faint under the street lamp, then, behind them, windows opened. Apartment blinds lifted. More faces appeared. People leaning out of doorways, staring down from fire escapes. All of them mouthing the same verse. Marshall's knees buckled. His chest seized tight, lungs refusing to expand. He forced a whisper past his raw throat. Please, stop. The crowd froze, every mouth shut. For one breathless moment, the silence was absolute. Then, from every throat at once, the same sound erupted, a laugh. His laugh, his cadence, a perfect chorus of himself, echoing off the buildings, filling the sky, shaking his bones. Marshall dropped to his knees in the street, hands clamped over his ears. But the laugh tunneled through his skull, bypassing sound, embedding itself inside him, and then, at the very center of the crowd, he saw him, the boy, standing perfectly still, hoodie hanging loose, mic floating at his lips. He opened his mouth, and the city followed. Marshall gasped, tears streaking his face. His voice broke, desperate, pleading, I'm Marshall. I'm the real one. That's my voice. But the boy's grin widened, and the city thundered his reply, not anymore. Marshall's scream vanished into the night, and Detroit rapped on without him.